All right, welcome. In this video, this is Fall 2021, Program 10 with class member functions. So I'm going to continue with my Program 6. I'm going to choose to use my Program 6 as the template and work on this assignment because there will not be an array in this assignment. So it's the same number guess game. We have 3 levels, and we're going to, instead of separating this, we're going to add member functions to our class. So we have now in our class, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 member functions. The first set of member functions are accessor and mutator functions because our variables here, these variables, upper value, num guesses, current guess, and solution are all private member variables. So the best thing that you should do when you have private member variables is you make accessor and mutator functions so that outside of your class you can update the values of these without outside of the class. So I purposely have left a couple of functions that are not member functions. I have the play one round function and the setup level function. I made these outside of the class and not as, of course, they could all be member functions and then everything would be part of the class. But since we're learning here, I wanted you guys to practice using accessor and mutator functions. So I have removed those, left those 2 functions as non-member functions. So the output is really the same. So you should be very familiar with the number guess game before working on this assignment. I did provide you with my solution for Program 7, which you could modify quite easily if you did not get your Program 6 to work, but I'm going to reference my Program 6 for things that I don't want to have to copy and paste. All right, so again, we have our class number guess. Now, instead of assigning values to any of our variables here, we have what's called a constructor. So when you declare an instance of number guess, the constructor gets automatically called and is going to set all of the values. Well, you're going to put the code in your constructor to do that, but that's how everything gets initialized or constructed. An object of your class gets constructed and everything gets initialized in the constructor. And then these are the not complete set of accessor and mutator functions, but they are ones that we might need to use. And then these are the guess input function, the process guess, and the generate solution, which we've already been using, the small and large in order to give the feedback, above and below, and then the upper value, the number of guesses, the current guess, and the solution. All right, so let's get started. I've already started my project, and so I'm going to close. I might have to reference it, so I'm going to minimize this. Bring up my project in Visual Studio that I've already started. And I'm going to take the template code. So I do have, this is my Program 6, which I am going to reference and take information from. But I'm going to use the template code here to get started. So this is the template code that was provided with the assignment. So I'm going to put this template code here in my compiler. And if you notice right away, there are tons of errors. So I did not give you working code. I did not give you a complete class. I did not give you, you have to work on it to add to it. So let's just start at the top and take a look at the code. Of course, you have your name and all of that. We have our preprocessor directives here. And then we have to define our class here. I did not define it for you, so you can, you're going to have to define it in order to make this program work, obviously. Then the member functions are going to go here. You set up the member functions as displayed here. So I have not completed all of the member functions. If you notice some of the member functions, so the class is like the prototype. So instead of having the prototypes, you have the prototypes are in the class. So if you take a look here, these are the prototypes of the member functions, right? This is called set upper range. It has one parameter of type int, and it's a void function. So the prototypes get defined in the class in the class definition at the top of the program. And then below that, you put your member functions. In our next assignment, we're going to separate into the .h file and the .cpp file. But right now, we're putting everything into one file. So below our class definition, we have our member functions, which this is incomplete. And there's all of these red lines and errors because we don't have the prototypes in here, which I will be adding in a minute. I'm just going to go through this before it gets too full. And then we have our two prototypes. These are our non-member functions. So again, be sure to add your preconditions and post-conditions and describe what the functions do. But we have the play one round function. It's going to be very similar to our program 6. And we have the setup level function, which will be very similar to previous programs. Then we have our main function down here. And then we have our function definitions for play one round and setup level. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and spend some time and remove the errors. There are tons of errors, and so I don't want to start with code that is not working, so I'm going to go through and remove the errors. So when I build my solution, I notice right away I have a whole bunch of issues in my code. I have all of these things that do not exist. So the first set of errors I'm going to get rid of. I'm going to take my class definition and copy it here from the assignment. And I want you guys to read through it, but I did give you the whole class definition and then paste it here. So now let's just take a look at it. The name of it is number guess. It has a constructor. The constructor is the first function, the first member function that's going to initialize everything. It has a set upper range function that is going to take the value that is passed to it, which is the upper range, and it's going to set that. That's the keyword set is for mutator functions and get is for accessor functions. The get upper range function is going to return. The reason it has this const here is because it's just a reminder, and it doesn't have to be there, but this function is not going to modify any of the values of the variables in the function. It's just going to return it. Accessor and mutator functions are very simple and very straightforward, and they just set values and return values. Then I have my public, after my accessor and mutator functions, I'm just going to separate here. You don't have to, I'm just explaining. I have my guess input function, my process guess function, my generate solution function. So you're going to get to be able to practice because these are member functions. You're not going to have to use the dot operator to access the member variables. You're going to have to use the dot operator to access any member functions from non-member functions. So there's not huge changes from program 6 to this one. The biggest changes are where things are happening in your program. And then I have my member functions here. So for every member function that I have, I need to have every member function that is in my prototype here, I need to add those member function definitions down here. So the default constructor is the one that's going to initialize all the member variables. And then I have set upper range, which I showed you. It's going to take an integer and it's going to set the private member variable to whatever value is passed to it. The get upper range is going to return the private member variable of the upper value. Then I have set num guesses, get num guesses. So what I need to do here is add the rest of the member functions. So I'm just going to go up here in and the nice thing about it is it's telling me which ones do not have definitions. So I'm going to take all of these member functions and copy and paste them here. And I'm going to turn these from function prototypes into function definitions. I also need to, of course, indicate that these are member functions. So it takes a little time to modify this. So I'm going to pause the video for a minute and do this work, and then I'm going to come back and talk more about it. All right, now I am back and I will show you what I've done. All of my member functions are defined here in my class, and now I have added the block of code for the implementation of the member functions. So if I go down here, all of those, I have my constructor, which I have not finished initializing values, but I will do that next. I have set up, this one was already set up for you. So I have gone ahead and set up the rest of the functions. So I didn't do anything except add the block of code, and I will add the implementation for these after. My point here is what I'm trying to do is remove all of the errors. So let's build and see if I've removed any errors. So if you notice, I now have removed so many errors, because before I had errors in which I was trying to call functions in which the definition of the function didn't exist. Now, even though these functions don't have any work in them, down here in my play one round function, it can still call the get num guesses function, and it's not gonna, it's not gonna do anything, but if it hasn't been implemented, but it's not gonna cause the compiler to give an error, because the compiler now knows that there is a block of code or a body of this function. So my first step was just to remove all of the errors, and then I will start adding the implementation. So the only other errors I have at this point are this variable I, which doesn't exist. The reason it doesn't exist is it has not been declared. So I'm going to go ahead and declare it. And so now I have, I believe, removed that error as well. So now I'm at least working with gotten rid of some of the errors, but I still have some more issues. So let's take a look at my next issue. So your compiler is very helpful in letting you know what the problems are. So the first set of issues I was having was because I have these calls to these functions, and the function bodies did not exist because they hadn't been defined yet. But now those functions are part of my class, and even though they're not doing anything, at least the function has a block of code and it's been defined. The next set of issues are about my class itself. So if I take a look down here, I have warnings. The reason I have warnings is because I have not implemented my constructor. So my constructor is going to initialize all of the values of all of my member variables. So this is letting me know that I am trying to use member variables that have not been initialized. So in order to get rid of those warnings, all I need to do is update my constructor and initialize all the member variables. The second set of errors I'm having here, well, there's also, this is uninitialized, but these that say that this function must return a value, if you take a look at it, this has a bool return type. So this is letting me know that this function is a function that returns something. So you can't have a function defined that doesn't return anything. So at this point, just to get rid of these errors, I'm going to have each of these functions return something, and of course later it might have to be changed because process guess does a lot more than just return. But just to get rid of these errors, in part of this process, I'm going to start with working code. Get solution, so this function needs to return. So it's going to return the member variable, which is the solution. I believe the name of the member variable is solution. So this actually, that's what this function does. It returns the solution. Get num guesses is going to return num guesses. And this one's going to actually set it. So I'm going to go ahead and set up this one. So this is going to take what value is passed to it, the num, and you're going to do that in the setup function and assign that value to the private member variable called num guesses. Let's make sure that's the name of it. Yes. And I think that I got rid of those. So now if I build it, I'm going to be rid of those. And the only big thing I need to do now is I need to initialize all of my member variables. So I'm going to do that by copying and pasting these here to make sure that they all get initialized. All right, so I've already, of course, when you do this, you don't need the data type. I just didn't want to forget about any of them. So upper value's already been initialized. So this is the constructor for our class, and when you have the constructor, you need to initialize all of your values. So the constructor gets called when an object of our class gets when you declare an object of type number guess, then by default, automatically the default constructor will get called. In your next assignment, you're going to make a couple of different constructors, an explicit value constructor and a default constructor, just as practice. In this one, we're just going to use a default constructor. So I think I have above is false and below is false. Number of guesses, I'm initializing to 0. Current guess, I'm initializing to 0. And solution, I'm initializing to 0. So I hopefully now have solved the problem. And all right, so I've solved that problem. Now I just have two more issues. So in my setup level function, I have declared a variable called level, and then I'm testing the level, right? So obviously I can't, if level has been declared and not assigned any value, I should not have a condition or an expression that tests that variable. So I'm going to now ask, oh, actually, this is where I can bring up my program and I can go here and I can take this right here. That way I don't have to, I can copy and paste. So this is my, when I have the level and I'm asking the user to enter their level. And now instead of this being a member variable, this is not a member variable. This is now just a variable that I have declared. So let's review that. My setup level function is going to take a current game, but the level, it's not going to set the level. I have removed the level out of the class so you guys could practice doing accessor and mutator functions. So it's going to declare the level, ask the user to enter the level. It's going to get the level from the user. And I forgot the while part of that loop. So it's going to get the level from the user, and I'm using a do while to make sure that the user enters a level that is accurate. And then after it gets the level from the user, it's going to use mutator functions to set the number of guesses. This is a member function, and to set the upper range. So I'm going to do that in the next video. I'm just going to check and make sure I have solved all of my issues. Let's see what warning I have. I have removed all of my errors and warnings, and now I'm ready to start working on the program.